Hey, how's it going, and welcome to the first of my JOJOLands chapter reviews. I'm planning on doing these monthly whenever a new chapter is out. My idea is I'd like to do a live read-through with you guys and then do like a more structured kind of review of the chapter. So if you want to check out my reaction to the chapter from the other night, I'll have a link to that stream in the description. But yeah, the JOJOLands, it's been a long time coming. Like, this part was announced, I think it was like a year and a half ago at this point. And I think this is just generally a pretty exciting time to be a fan of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, because I'd imagine for a lot of us, this is our first, like, new JoJo part that we're experiencing from start to finish. You know, I'm personally part of the 2012, like, the part 1 and 2 anime generation. Like, that's how I got into it. And throughout that entire time, JOJOLands was running, so yeah, it's really exciting kind of getting to dive into a total unknown with a new JoJo, new characters, new stands, new setting. So it's gonna be a fun ride. Buckle in, fellas. We might be in it for another decade. Possibly. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about with this one. And I guess I'll start by saying, like, this was probably the most fun I think I've ever had, like, reading a chapter of a manga basically ever. Yeah, this is totally unlike what I kind of expected, and honestly, I'm not even sure if I really had, like, a concrete idea of what I expected the JOJOLands to be like. The biggest kind of image I think I had in my mind was, like, just the title JOJOLands really implied a sense of adventure. Like, it would kind of go back to the more kind of part 3 and part 7 style of going on this real big journey throughout these islands. And it seems like that's basically what we're going to be getting, but what I wasn't expecting was these characters and just, like, the overall tone of it to be so completely bonkers. Like, JoJo has always been kind of a quirky series. Like, it does have bizarre in the title, but I feel like even by the series' own standards, this is, like, crazy. One big topic of debate among people before the part even started was where the setting is going to be, and I feel like more than basically any other manga series, this is something that's, like, really heavily thought about. Because a lot of these parts are very defined by kind of like where they take place. You know, everybody knows part 5 for taking place in Italy. Part 4 and 8 both have Morio. And I think the setting of Hawaii is really cool. Like, first of all, it's just different from anything we've ever had in this series before. As far as I can remember, they never, like, none of these characters have ever gone to, like, a tropical kind of Pacific island. So I think the setting is definitely going to afford the part a lot of opportunities to kind of stand out from, you know, the rest of the parts in the series. And then there's, of course, our characters. So I already kind of love this crew. And who better to start with than Jodio Joestar, which is a hilarious name, Jodio. And the more I've kind of stopped and thought about this character, the more I'm certain that this guy is kind of meant to be like, you know, the Steel Ball Run, JOJOLands universe equivalent of Giorno. He's just a maniac. Since kind of following the chronology, like, part 7 was kind of this strange mishmash of, like, parts 1, 2, and 3. Since it had, like, Johnny as this sort of kind of spiritual successor to Jonathan, and, you know, it had characters like Gyro, who's kind of like composite Caesar and William Zeppeli, had Diego Brando, and then in part 4 we had Josuke, who was, like, part of him was Josefumi, who was kind of like that universe's Jotaro equivalent. So kind of just following the chronology, it makes a lot of sense that this guy is sort of meant to be Giorno. And I think the name Jodio might kind of be an allusion to that, because, like, obviously Giorno was sort of Dio's kid, but also, like, actually Jonathan's. So him being called Jodio Joestar is probably a nod to that. But yeah, so far, Jodio, I really like him a lot, because he's just a menace. He's just this unhinged, crazy person. Like, JoJo protagonists have always been a little kind of off-kilter, with the exception of, like, Jonathan, who is pretty straight and narrow, but I think even compared to the rest of them, he just makes such a strong impression. If you kind of describe the events of this chapter to somebody, they would probably assume that you're describing Grand Theft Auto 6 and not the JOJOLands. Yo, in one chapter, this character goes and kills 2 cops, blows up a cop car, sells drugs twice. So yeah, just from the get-go, I like this character a lot. It's going to be interesting to see kind of like where this character goes from here, because this man is already kind of a villain, right? It kind of feels like, what if Giorno basically did not have sort of like a good influence in his life, but was still interested in criminal activities? So yeah, we're just gonna have to wait and see if this character kind of like goes down the path of light and kind of becomes a good guy, or if this is just the shindig. It's just like he's kind of just like a piece of shit. I'm kind of down for that, honestly. Visually, I think he looks pretty cool. He definitely looks pretty different compared to all the rest of the Joestars. Like, you're definitely not going to mix this guy up with anybody else. And then we have Dragona, who's a character that you're going to be seeing lots of fun, I say fun in huge quotation marks, conversations about for years and years to come. My advice in regards to this character is to not engage in discussions about their gender on Twitter, and also to not use Twitter. But so the whole situation with Dragona's gender is one of those kinds of things where, like, the translation from Japanese to English is always going to be a little bit kind of questionable. You know, I don't speak or read Japanese myself. I just know that, like, just kind of the way their language is set up, it makes stuff like pronouns and, like, topics involving gender just different. So I think for the time being, it's probably a wise idea to just wait for some kind of, like, official word from Araki on it, or some, like, clarification in later chapters, but either way, it's not something that's worth, like, getting into arguments with people about. So it seems like for the time being, this is just kind of like what I think is going on, is that Dragona is a man. They just look feminine, and they get breast injections as well for some reason. I don't know, I guess he just likes the titties, but... So yeah, that seems to be the case, is that Dragona is a dude, they're just pretty. And yeah, I think having two Joestars like this is going to make for a pretty interesting dynamic, because unless I'm losing my mind, we've never had a pair of Joestar siblings before, right? Yeah, obviously, like, Johnny had a brother, but he fell off. I'm talking like two siblings going on the same adventure at the same time. So yeah, that should be cool to see. It's kind of a dynamic we've never really seen in the series before. I'm also excited to see more of Hot Dog Man, who just seems like an absolute goober. Like, I can't wait to see this serious operation go down, and then we just have, like, Pink Guy hanging out. And then we have Paco, who we don't really know a whole lot about, but I think his kind of, like, really serious demeanor is gonna kind of add a nice balance to the group. Since now we have kind of a nice, like, goofy, serious axis to work off of. Where you have Hot Dog Man, this character still doesn't have a name, so I'm just gonna keep calling him Hot Dog Man, is goofy, and then you have, like, on the other end is Paco, who's pretty serious, and then the two Joestars are kind of in the middle. So the plot and, like, overall tone of this part seems completely out of its mind. Like, the part begins with a traffic stop where the police immediately begin harassing and assaulting the Joestars. So they just straight up murder them, blow up the cop car, and then make a getaway to go do a drug exchange to make fat stacks of cash, and then they go to school. Like, I think this part is conceptually really, really awesome. I really like the idea of the part kind of centering around, like, criminal activity. At least it seems like that's going to be the focus for a little bit, but, you know, we'll just have to see what develops. You can never really tell with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So, like, whereas part 5 was about, like, the mafia and this more kind of, like, I don't know if elegant is the right way of putting it, but this more kind of, like, romanticized view of crime and, like, criminal organizations. These two are just straight up trapping. Like, this feels like a JoJo part that was, like, written by a Zoomer and not Araki, who's in his 60s. I think that's something that's kind of cool about Araki, is the fact that, like, even though he is kind of getting up in age, it never feels like he's ever gotten old, you know? He still feels kind of, like, hip enough and in tune with the youth to create this story about, like, high school age kids selling drugs. And it doesn't really come across as cringe. Because I think the story is kind of self-aware enough to realize that, like, this is ridiculous. Like, this is nuts, but it kind of just rolls with it. Like, you can tell Araki is having fun with this concept. And I think that's kind of just part of what makes JoJo's Bizarre Adventure so much fun, is just the fact that you can tell Araki is always having fun with it. I kind of get the feeling with certain manga, you can kind of get this sort of vibe that the author is kind of like, they're sort of mentally done with it, but they're just, like, keeping on with it because that's kind of just the thing to do, right? But I think Araki has really done such a great job at kind of positioning himself and his story to where, like, he can kind of just do whatever he wants, you know? If one day he reads on the internet about, like, beetles, he can just decide, you know what would be cool is if I have a beetle fighting arc in JOJOLands. Or now in the year of our Lord 2023, where Araki's like, you know what would be cool is if I make a story about a 15-year-old selling drugs. So even though there's these certain constants in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, like stands, Araki is just so willing to introduce new ideas and just make this weird, kooky story that he wants to tell that it never really gets boring. And yeah, it's just entertaining. Like, I think this definitely is the most entertained I've ever been reading a, you know, first chapter of a part. Like, this is going to be so much fun going forward, kind of experiencing this with people and getting to talk about all the insane stuff that happens. Like, bro, they have this whole trapping, like, stealing operation, and the principal of their school is in on it. That's hilarious. And I'm really excited that the first kind of, like, arc of this is going to, like, revolve around a heist, because I fucking love heists. Heists are the coolest thing ever. Anything that revolves around a complicated plot to steal a thing, I'm, like, flipping out over, you know, like, all of Persona 5, basically. So yeah, this is gonna be awesome. I can't wait to see this, like, diamond heist take place. And one thing that I think is gonna make this kind of, like, stealing-oriented part, like, kind of interesting, is their stands, and at least 2 out of the 3 kind of, like, main stands that we've seen definitely feel kind of designed around, like, this idea of heists and of stealing stuff. So first of all, we have Jodio stand November Rain, which looks totally unlike any other main JoJo stand. And it's also the only non-humanoid main stand other than, like, Tusk, but even then Tusk end up, like, you know, in Act 4 he ends up having legs and a humanoid body. But yeah, this guy looks insane. He's kind of like this nightmare fusion of Hierophant Green and fun. So far we don't really have, like, an in-depth, in-universe explanation for what the stand does, but it seems like it basically just creates these kind of, like, localized rainstorms that crush people. So yeah, it seems like a pretty straightforward ability. It also doesn't seem like that strong in comparison to a couple of the other main JoJo stands, like Star Platinum, Crazy Diamond, and Gold Experience are borked beyond belief, but this feels like it's more in the kind of, like, you know, stone-free kind of power range. And also, since it doesn't have arms, don't expect to see any, like, stand rushes from this guy. Or maybe he does, I don't know, maybe he'll, like, get on 2 of his little spiral legs and just, like, start stabbing people. That'd be awesome. Smooth Operators is another cool one. I had to listen to this song that this is based on, Smooth Operator. It's really good. I think that's a cool song to kind of take inspiration from. And yeah, these seem pretty cool. It kind of reminds me of almost like a reverse Crazy Diamond, to where, like, Crazy Diamond fixes things, but this, like, disassembles them. And I think ability-wise, this one's probably the most interesting. I feel like there's a lot you can do with the concept of, like, removing stuff from objects, because that's its thing, is that it can kind of, like, remove stuff even if it's kind of affixed in a certain place. So that should be interesting to see if just, like, mid-fight Dragona is like, you idiot, notice something is missing? I took off your ball sack. And then we have the Hustle, which is another one that's conceptually pretty simple. It basically just lets Paco kind of, like, stick objects onto his muscles. I can't imagine this has a whole lot of practical combat applications, but yeah, when it comes to stealing things, the Hustle and Smooth Operators are, like, probably 2 of the best stands you could have. So it's going to be interesting to see how these 2 kind of use their abilities in, like, both combat and non-combat settings. Alright, so what's up next for the JOJOLands? The most kind of, like, prevailing theory that I see is that this villa that they're going to rob is owned by one of the Higashikatas. Specifically, Joshu seems to be, like, the #1 candidate, and I think this is pretty likely. I'd imagine that pretty soon we're going to start seeing, like, characters and concepts from Part 8 rear its head. You know, assuming it is one of the Higashikatas, I think it realistically could be almost any of these people. At least in the translation I read, I don't think it specified whether or not it was a man. I think it just referred to them as they. So I think it theoretically could be any of these people. It could be Norisuke, assuming he's still up and kicking. Could be Hato, could even be Josuke for all we know. And since at least 10 years have passed between, like, JoJolion and JoJoLands, all these characters are now 10 years older. So it seems pretty likely that I would say Joshu is probably candidate #1 to take over the Higashikata business. So in that time, he's probably kind of wizened up and got his act together. And there is a precedent for Hawaii being, like, a vacation destination for the Higashikatas. Because in JoJolion chapter 18, there's that scene where they're all in their bathing suits and they're talking about how they were going to go to Hawaii, but they missed their flight. So yeah, I think it being a Higashikata is pretty likely. This whole chapter just feels like a daydream. This is actually just, like, something that, like, if you were bored in class, you would kind of just, like, let your mind wander. And you're like, what if the new JoJo, like, sold drugs? Oh, yo, shout out to the mechanism. I forgot to talk about the mechanism, which is Araki's kind of, like, weird philosophical concept for the chapter. But yeah, this is a story about how a boy got filthy rich in the subtropical islands. What a noble character. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. See you guys next time.